IVM.
There has never been a more important time to truly understand consumers and the insights we get from them than now. And as sector after sector sees widespread disruption, it's having the widest effect on spaces like the restaurant and live food and beverage industry. You know, that traditionally focused on physical experiences as their core product. And this is exactly what I wanted to get some insight into in this week's episode of Advertising is Dead with Divya Aggarwal, the head of marketing at Impresario Handmade Restaurants, the company behind Social, Smokehouse Delhi, and many others. And also to understand from her how her early years focused on consumer insights has driven her journey so far and will drive it ahead as well. That's what's ahead on this week's episode of Advertising is Dead. I'm Varun, the co-founder and content chief of The Glitch. We're right back with Advertising is Dead.
बेटा, did you know 79% of all scientists in NASA are Indian only?
देखो, इंडिया में टैक्स सिर्फ मिडिल क्लास भरती है. Everyone is just enjoying free यार.
आजकल के youngsters are only interested in partying and enjoying. उनको देश की पड़ी ही नहीं है.
बेटा तुम बस शादी कर लो, उसके बाद तो you can enjoy life like anything.
I will tell you what this country needs. This country needs 15 years of dictatorship. That is the only way to become a superpower. See the Chinese, how much they've progressed.
सुनो, तुमने ये WhatsApp forward देखा?
So what's common between all of these statements?
They're all absolutely rubbish.
Fake WhatsApp forwards that spread like wildfire.
And statements that defy any logic.
We are here to debunk them all.
Way of family WhatsApp groups, worst nightmare. Where what happens when you read a book.
Basically, we're just a bunch of guys who want to cut through the bullshit of everyone saying this, how it won't be true.
So that the next time someone confidently squeezes out some WhatsApp or Twitter BS, you can look them dead in the eye and go, Uncle, please sit.
So join me, Joel,
and me, Tushar,
every Mondays for a fresh new episode of Uncle, Please Sit.
Welcome back to Advertising is Dead. We're with Divya. Hi Divya, welcome to the show.
Hi Varun, thanks a lot. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's interesting that I know we had a pre-chat before we got into this, and one of the things that stood out for me, and I want to get into that sooner, but before we get into that, I wanted to first start off saying, if I talk about the broader marketing space, right? What's your perspective been about how it's changed from, let's say, the time you kind of kicked off your career to now, in terms of what have you seen as the broader changes that you've kind of seen? I know it's a broad stroke question, but we'll start with that.
Yeah, and I think I'll give a broad answer, and it may be obvious one. But, from when I started, I think it was a lot more paper and pen in the way we used to approach things. It was a lot more traditional. It was a lot more GRPs. And I think 14 years down the line, it's literally a lot more digital across industries. That has been one of the biggest change which has happened, the way we have been consuming information, the way your consumer is consuming information, right? So for me, that has really changed the way you are advertising and your channels of communication. But pretty much, I think the basics of marketing remains the same. The channels and mediums may change, but what has stayed is your consumer need, is how you are deciphering that consumer need, and how you're still trying to get your message across to the consumers in that whole litany of so many messages, and trying to get their attention and get your brand to be relevant to them.
What I find interesting is that when we talk to anyone who's been through almost like what I call a marketing professional's journey, yours is interesting for me to dig into because you started off in consumer insights.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember that when you and I had an earlier chat, I thought you had a very interesting perspective on how that's kind of helped you become almost the communications or marketing professional you are today. So let's run through that arc a little bit. I thought that will be good to run into.
Yeah, Varun, happy to sort of talk about it. Like we were chatting the other day. So I actually started my career as a market researcher / consumer insights person. And, that role is, of course, something that concentrates so much on understanding consumer. Something that we used to say, right? You look at data, you understand it, and you call out the insight. And so that consumer insight work, the way you start understanding marketing is based on your consumer focus. You always go back and think of the consumer insight, the need gap that you're trying to fill. And then, of course, I moved to a brand management role for for the brand called Maggie Noodles in Nestle, which of course is a purely consumer loved brand. But what you could tie back together was always remembering to go back to your consumer insight. Also, what happens with consumer insight, for all the students and budding marketers, you start understanding data, you start connecting data bits. It's not only what consumer is saying as a verbatim, but it's also data sources. It's also learning your segments, learning your retail track, household track, brand track. All of this really helps in developing a perspective of how consumer is viewing your brand, what is their actual perception, and what is their actual behavior. And that understanding as a marketer helps you in really sort of building the journey. At least it has personally helped me from an industry to industry and brand to brand, whether it was Maggie or it was Star or even Twitter, where I was working with a lot of media and entertainment clients. That has remained at the core of how I at least work as a marketer. And I go back to my consumers, I go back to my friends. I really chat with people and try and understand. Sometimes when you're sort of sitting in your own conference room, talking to your own team, you get so biased about your brand. But, I was taught by my first boss from day one, don't be biased. And be very careful of brand managers because they become very, very biased. So as a consumer insight person, it's important to be neutral. And I think that's a learning which came, which means, a little bit more humility, a little bit more being the devil's advocate and, sort of trying to rethink of what you're saying and whether it will actually get traction with the consumer. So, yeah.
You make an interesting point, right? Is that so? Consumer insights was obviously before the spread of the entire digital medium was still largely an analog process, right? I mean, you obviously have conversations with different kinds of consumers, etc. And there has been this overarching conversation about how digital's kind of come in and made data so much more freely available. So those insights don't necessarily have to be, I mean, if you have to call this digital, I'm going to call that analog. So it doesn't necessarily have to be analog. But have you seen the fact that, I mean, how do you kind of strike the balance, right? Because I think going entirely digital also isn't the answer. How have you seen that balance coming across?
Absolutely. I think what you're saying, what has happened is through digital, it's easier to reach your consumer now. You still need to listen to them. But earlier you had to do that paper and pen interview where necessarily you will need to walk up to the interview in the good old days, right? Fill that 200-page questionnaire. While today you can just sort of create a form from the Google. But ultimately you will still get that consumer to talk to you. I think what has also happened in this whole space, right? One of the biggest fears that used to happen earlier was what consumer is claiming versus what their actual behavior is. So, new methods like neurology, actually trying to map what consumer is thinking. A lot of work is happening in that direction also for marketers and for brand managers to get something which is more concrete. And I think digitization has made all that possible. But ultimately, what connects is really conversations, right? Everything else is a medium. It's distribution which is easier. It's speed which becomes spacier. But you still want to understand what did I think of this product that I had at social, right? Nobody can take away that verbatim, whichever way it comes to you.
That also kind of digs into one other point, that is the fact that there are many things we make, many choices we make as consumers which are subconscious, which we don't even realize that we're making. And if you ask us directly, we might give you an answer which might not necessarily be what we think because you're worried about how we'll be judged. So it's an interesting balance to kind of bring both together. Would you say that's like what you're working towards?
I think balance is definitely necessary. And as a marketer, that's when you start understanding your brand deeply, right? One of the most important thing, I think, for me personally, when I from consumer insight to a brand management person, was to strike that balance between wearing a consumer focused lens and a brand focused lens. And how do you sort of marry these together? Because a lot of people say a lot of things also. But that's the art that you develop over a period of time. The more intrinsically you understand your brand. And I think that's very, very important. Like you rightly said, people say a lot of things, but how do you sort of, serve that hay and stack together and get something which is more meaningful is the art of marketing somewhere.
So if you had to kind of break down how your thought process has changed, because you actually very interestingly have worked across multiple industries, right? Obviously, with Nestle and Maggie in the beginning, then with Star and obviously Twitter, and now with Impresario. So how have you seen how you function as a marketer kind of evolve? I mean, what has kind of changed in the way you function, and what's kind of stayed the same? If you have to put that down, what would you say?
I think what has stayed the same is actually the basics, right? You need to think brand, you need to think consumer, you need to think the need gap that a brand is fulfilling. That remains at the core of wherever you are. But the pace changes from industry to industry. Like if I talk about FMCG, where I work in a giant corporate with set processes, of course, everything used to take more time, everything was more driven, you know.
Yeah.
While I went to Star, which was literally that show marketing, like you say, right? Content marketing.
Yeah.
You have lesser
Yeah.
window, content is churned out every day, and you end up spending huge amount of money in 4 weeks of media plan to get that consumer to view the first episode. Much more
Yeah.
pacier. I
Yeah.
actually had a stint in a small early stage startup also,
Yes.
which was called
Yes.
Green Snack Company. It was in healthy
Okay.
snacking space, and that experience was very very precious when you don't have anything, and how you sort of apply your learnings from a large FMCG giant to a small
Yeah.
place, and we got
Yeah.
funded, and it's doing really well today. So,
Mm-hmm.
all of that together, I think pace changes, dynamism changes, application starts happening. Like what you learn from FMCG is very precious because
Yeah.
you understand the whole hog of marketing. You understand to manage your P&L. And then you take those learnings, at least that's what I've sort of done, I've taken those learnings in different industries. If I talk
Yeah.
about my role in Twitter, which was actually a revenue slash sales role, and I was looking at media and entertainment as a category. But I think as a client partner who was sort of servicing the clients like a Hotstar or a Woot or an Amazon, one was able to bridge that gap and sell your Twitter products better because you understand marketing. So how can you
Yeah.
apply marketing in different roles, especially all the digital roles that, digital sales roles, whether it's Google or Facebook or Twitter or likes, depend on really knowing your consumer and marketing basics well. And of course, Impresario has been a very, very interesting choice also. Impresario was looking to onboard an experienced marketer who understood the basic of the marketing, plus, digital sales so that you can do ROI sort of led marketing. Also, Impresario is at a brink of on the journey of moving from a startup to a corporate. So, having worked
Yeah.
in sort of huge corporates, but having worked in an early stage startup has made me understand how to work in an environment where, yes, you need to be nimble, but you need to be more process focused, more corporate focused, more professional. So I think
Yeah.
all of that has finally culminated in this role where I'm actually able to apply everything that I've learned.
It's also a very interesting time for you to have moved to Impresario, because I think one of the spaces that's seen the most amount of disruption, and in many ways negative, and I'm still trying to figure what what positives can kind of come out of this. How has that period been? I mean, I promised you I will not use the word the term which starts with new and ends with normal,
Unprecedented.
but I will just say that how has this period kind of changed how you even market the brands?
This has actually been a very, very interesting period. When the lockdown happened, I was like, oh my God, there is a whole year plan, which, we had planned with so much enthusiasm, which was all about going out, talking about the brand, meeting people, and none of that can happen now. Also, like you rightly
Yeah.
said, an industry which thrives on getting people together, on partying, on alcohol, on food. What do you do when everyone is in home? I think the first thing that we thought as a team was that our consumers are right now sitting inside homes. We have to reach them there. Then,
Yeah.
we really thought of what do we stand as a brand. So social, let me talk about social, which is our trailblazer brand, stands for maximum percentage of revenue and has a presence of almost 25 outlets pan India. So when we thought of this brand, we really know that it's not only about food and beverage. It's about vibe, it's about entertainment, it's about ambience, and it's also about building communities that we have done very, very thoughtfully. Some of the
Yeah.
communities like inclusivity, sustainability, music, art, they were at the core of us. So even before government allowed home delivery, right? What we started doing was something called social indoors, which we started right, I think, in March itself, when the lockdown had just happened, where we just said that we will get leading musicians and artists who really swear by our brand and are our brand partners to come live on our channel. And this happened long before a lot of people had started going live. And through this learning, We took it a further step ahead when sort of restaurants could open. We have a space called Antisocial in Lower Parel,
Yeah.
which really
Yeah.
stands for, for gigs, for music. So what we started doing was we started doing antisocial sessions uh, with leading DJs from Antisocial, and we took it a notch higher. We tied up with Budweiser, and we created a menu on Swiggy, which
Yeah.
was exclusively for this, with the right food, with snacking items and things like that. Again, so basically you are trying to bring the experience to where your consumer is. And now taking it a
Yeah.
step ahead, now that things are relatively more unlocked, so as to say, we are starting
Yeah.
something called a social party starter, where we are saying we will give you food, we will give you alcohol at MRP, but we will also get a bartender in a safety, in all the guidelines. We will get you a
Yeah.
playlist that will give you the experience of being in a social kind of environment. And we will give you, we also started reinventing the categories, which came from more FMCG kind of working, right? For instance, we came up
Yeah.
with something called social mixers, which are basically cocktail mixers that you can get on inside the home with our trademark cocktail recipes. We created videos around that, and that product now people can have that similar experience in their homes. Similarly,
Yeah.
for our brand called Smokehouse Delhi, we were one of the first ones who launched DIY. And the idea was to get that comfortable, that delectable Smokehouse Delhi food and the traditional dishes of pasta, then pizza, then burgers inside people's home, in easy to, which is very easy to make and replicate. So I
Yeah.
think we really started thinking that yes, we are locked in, but what can we do? And of course, a lot of it is happening digitally. A lot of it is happening through very strong content marketing in terms of how
Yeah.
do we partner with people, how do we reach out to other brands, what else do we do where we can see the similarities between brands and be relevant. Another trend that we have seen very strongly for F&B as an industry is of course the importance of delivery. Delivery was
Yeah.
always something which used to happen, at least for brands like us, because we were more of a place where people congregate together. But now we understand the importance of delivery. So we are really trying to understand tricks around it. We are really trying to create content, where we talk more about our food, where we educate people about what we have. And again, one of the biggest innovations which we have done, and I think lockdown and COVID has really fast-paced it, is digitization. So
Yeah.
what has been really interesting for me and what I've been able to lead for the organization based on strong digital experience is also all the digital efforts. So we have actually created, and which is first in the industry, we have created a web-enabled platform, which is sort of our own platform through which you can get food delivered, you can get a pickup done, and that same sort of system will also help us when we open the restaurants for ordering
Yeah.
directly and payment directly through contactless methods, because that's the need
Yeah.
of the hour. And also, this whole
True.
system is enabled through WhatsApp. So, if you order something from that platform, you will immediately get a notification from my social official number. And the next time you
Yeah.
need to order, you don't need to go anywhere. On your WhatsApp, you can just
Yeah.
click, you can just order. What it really helps us is, again, we are thinking about consumer. How do we ensure safety, hygiene, quality, and, of course, food made with love, and you sort of deliver it directly. So we came
Yeah.
up with campaign called That Social Wali Feeling, where we said that we will get that feeling inside home, right? Which is emotional, which brings that nostalgia, and that's what we are doing for delivery. So and of course we are preparing for places to open up as and when they are opening up. Like one outlet has opened for us in Chandigarh, and it's doing really well. But of course, it depends on city, it depends on the number of cases and everything
True.
around. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
these are some of the things.
You make a lot of interesting points there, right? Because the two things, if I look at it broadly, which stand out to me is that what was for me, when you go out to a place, like you said, to have food, to have a drink, etc. Those elements were not necessarily the only reason you would go there, right? You would go there for the experience, like you said, and what for me has really stood out is that technology and content have kind of become almost
Yes.
backbones to what I think more than ever. Initially it was okay. It's a fun thing to do just to create engagement on social media. I was going to say social, but I realized that would just be confusing to say on social media. But what I feel it's now really done is the fact that it's almost an essential part of what you will have to do going ahead. I mean, do you see
100%.
any of these kind of not, I mean, being short term, or do you see a lot of these kind of being long term in terms of just using tech? Because this bringing the experience home has become a core focus across the board. So, do you see this kind of staying as a consistent piece?
I think 100%. Content marketing, strong content laurels, the way you treat your content as a brand is going to stay. I think we have learned, we have understood how important it is, because despite everything, we have seen our engagement count increase. You would
Yeah.
think, why would it happen when we were open? So many things were happening, but our social media credentials have become a lot more stronger. The kind
Yeah.
of messages that we are getting from consumers has become a lot more, nostalgic. There's so much consumer love which is coming our way. These trends
Yeah.
are there to stay, Varun. I don't think they're going anywhere. I think what has happened is that, such difficult circumstances really generates opportunities, and I think everyone is talking about it. We have seen it really come alive. For instance, importance of delivery will stay,
Yeah.
looking at the trends. It will take some time in things going back to whatever it was. So you will, but people still want food. They still want experience. There is no dearth of that. Like in some of the markets which have opened up, like a US or a Europe, even for alcohol, like a lot of people are taking cocktails on the go, and such things will start happening in India also. You
Yeah.
will take parties inside home, and as a brand, as social or smokehouse steady, I still want to give that love to my consumer in terms of food, in terms of categories, but I will need to innovate and catch up with the time. And
Yeah.
digitization in digital mediums will help me in reaching my consumer.
So it's almost taken a product that, if I have to call it a product, that is purely physical in that sense, and has said, okay, this is almost. I mean, would you say that over time, and this is something the more I've been reading about the space, I've realized is that while the revenue stream would always be the physical spaces, over time it's the digital parts which will almost become and grow into a very strong revenue source that parallels with this as well. So even from a business perspective, do you see that being a strong addition?
I think the tech-enabled platform that we have will definitely be revenue generating, right? Also, our dependence on third-party aggregators from business perspective will go down. And
Yeah.
in terms of pure business and ROI, that option is quite expensive. So this will definitely help us in adding more traction. Also, I think from brand building perspective, what digital does
Yeah.
is, it helps you in strengthening your brand essence. I'll give you an example. For instance, one of the pillars, like I spoke about, inclusivity is very, very important for us. As a physical place, we want everyone is welcome in our restaurant, and we are very passionate about it. While we were locked in, there was queer month which was going on. So what we did was we did the whole Pride month, right? We did a month-long activity called the Queer Art Festival. And we also have an agency who we work with who are our inclusivity partners called One Future Collective. And Smirnoff came on board to sort of help us with this activity. And we did a month-long activity digitally where, we did art panels, panel discussions, music shows, things like that. But it was such a great way of building your brand credentials, credibility, and
Yeah.
talking to the consumers about what you want to do despite being
Yeah.
locked in. Otherwise, I would have done it in the physical space, but I could still do it online. And even when things open up, I don't think I'm going to let go of this medium now because it has made everything so easy. Even if I'm doing something from one outlet, I can do it in all the 25 outlets,
Yeah.
which wasn't really how we used to think about it earlier. So I think it has really opened up the way we are thinking.
What is, if you had to look at how you looked at consumers across the board before this entire disruption happened, and now, I mean, what would you say those insights are in terms of what you didn't think would be almost aspects of consumer thought process that would be there, but has really come out?
I think everything has been, because you've also been experiencing it as a consumer, right? Just,
Yeah.
I think just the fact that everyone is struggling so hard to not go out because they love their families. We had all,
Yeah.
and these are they may not be industry related, but just the need to go back home. Like personally, I work in Bombay, but my hometown is Delhi. But I've never felt the need to come back home so strongly. And that says a lot
Yeah.
about emotional connect that you can build as a brand. because that's the real insight which has happened of being closer to family, of sort of, appreciating gratitude. All these are real conversations which are happening. I think also how resilient everyone is, right? People are ready to
Yeah.
sort of figure out how to turn this crisis, so-called crisis, into an opportunity.
Yeah.
Also, people are still looking for experiences. That's a consumer need. Despite being locked in, people are trying to figure out ways, whether it's food or it's music or it's getting together. So, whether it was Zoom birthday calls that started in the beginning, it shows a consumer need, which I think
Yeah.
brands have latched onto in a lot of different ways. Every brand has been doing that. But in terms of consumer insights, basically everything has come back to the basics, if you ask. It's about
Yeah.
compassion, it's about humanity, it's about love. And of course, despite so much loss which is going on, some appreciation for what we have.
Yeah, so true. If you had to kind of go back to when you started off in the entire space, and if you had to turn around and say, um, is this what you wanted to be doing when you started off your career?
Uh, in terms of in the beginning of my career,
Yeah, in the beginning of your career, right
you
after
know,
you got out of college, for instance.
I definitely wanted to be a marketer. I think one clarity that I had was that I want to, this sounds very college-like, but I really wanted to be a brand manager on a very big brand. I think that happened with Maggie. But after that, I think I've really looked at the opportunities in the way of learning skill set and adding on to it. For example, when Twitter came my way, I understood as a marketer, to know also to understand P&Ls better, to understand business better. It's very important to do a sales stint, which I had not done. So I said
Yeah.
that, in today's time, with time evolving, rather than going to a traditional FMCG kind of sales role, let me do digital sales. So, with knowledge, with skill set, so there has been certain understanding of what I want to do. Uh, but yes, I think I have certainly been more curious, more hungry about learning new things and adding on to skill sets, which may not be traditional, where, people feel that changing things too soon may not be the best things to do. But the way I have looked at my journey has been to add a skill set everywhere that I go and add on to what I have learned while applying what has already been there. Uh, so I think it has worked well for me. I think just from understanding perspective, there are so many things that you come to know of.
Yeah.
It's
I also asked you this. Sorry, I also asked you this question primarily because a large amount of the audience that listens to this, right, would be like towards the end of their college stint, would have just started their careers off. I mean, I know a large chunk of them are that, and they're consistent. I mean, at least the conversation I've constantly had with them is to talk about, or rather, promise them that I will get from every guest some insights in terms of, okay, you're starting off now. What are the things you need to keep in mind, or what are the things you needn't worry about as you kind of build your career? So, if you had to put some of those points on, what would those points be like? What
I
don't you have to
think
worry about, and what should you kind of build yourself towards?
I think what you have to build yourself towards is to be very cognizant of learning at every place. Is to be very, very cognizant of saying that hard work is important. Uh, not only sort of getting into the thick of things. I think that has been really important for me at the beginning of my career when I said, really, dirty your hands, learn, go into depth.
Yeah.
That helps, that stays with you. What you need not worry about is how much salary will I earn when. Where will my career be 10 years later? Because I think we need to go with the flow. Yes, there needs to be a dedication to where you are. Keep creating value at whatever role you have. Keep your eyes and ears open for the trends which are there in the market. See what else can you learn to add on to your skill set. But don't worry too much about designations, about who am I reporting to, about what my package is today, because all of that will eventually happen. You need to sort of have that trust in what you are building, what you are learning, how are you building yourself, and it will definitely pay off.
You also make I think the part about the designations and the salary is so important, right? Because I think most times when you start off, you end up worrying about those a little too much, but you realize that over time, if you are consistently making the right moves and you kind of moving in the right direction, that eventually does come in. You've actually reminded me of something that happened to me, right? I think a year after I finished college in Symbiosis is the fact that we had gone back for one of those alumni meets. And there was somebody who was, I think, about 5-6 years senior, who had come in and was telling a lot of the students that, for the first 5 years, we prepared to not have any money, that you will have to live on vada pav. And I could see those shell-shocked faces of all those kids. And I remember me and my co-founder Rohit, we took them aside later and said, "Don't worry, it's okay. You'll make some money. It's not like that bad." So I think sometimes it's just that worry that everyone kind of comes in with, right? And as long as you do good work, I guess that scales up.
Yeah, and the importance of those early years, Varun, right? We now think of them so nostalgically that, oh my God,
Yeah.
what time. So that will always stay. You will move on in your journey, but every year is very precious in the life stage that you are.
Yeah. So if you had to kind of look ahead right now and see that, okay, while some of these trends that you've spoken of will be there, what else do you see? Especially when you look at, I mean, I take back two things, right? It was a couple of things. One is obviously on the consumer insights part, but also on the experiences and the content part. But if you look at it across the board, where do you see this kind of moving ahead in terms of, I mean, I would say a post-COVID world of where we obviously will have physical again, but in a very different way. What are the trends that you kind of see going ahead?
See, I think some of the trends would definitely be safety and hygiene will be very important for people to enter places. Uh, we may not have those crowded parties that we had looked at for quite some time now. Uh,
Yeah. One arm
your
distance, I'm guessing.
correct on the go, as a trend, on the go categories will increase. People will start getting things packed and maybe have it in their cars, maybe driveways. Some of the old things may come back. Uh,
Yeah.
the way you will do your marketing will definitely be more data driven, will be more customized, because of this whole move into digitization. You will also start collecting more data and being more cognizant of what's
Yeah.
happening. Uh, I think there will also be a difference in terms of food categories that one will look at. Maybe shorter menus, more tighter menus, separate takeaway menus, dishes which are maybe easier to pick up. Will all the
Yeah.
restaurateurs, chefs will really start thinking about it. And I think in our organization, we are already thinking about more DIY, more things
Yeah.
which are easier to replicate. So I think that trend will also continue. And I think rest, a lot is yet to be seen. I was reading somewhere, vegan, vegetarianism will go up. Though I feel all of this is fad, it will eventually, immunity boosting. Right now, like in today's time, every player has come out with immunity, which also is, I
Yeah.
think, something which is more sort of relevant right now. Uh,
Yeah.
but longer term, at least for a few years, one feels that, yeah, people will be definitely think of when they are stepping out, with whom are they meeting. There will be
Yeah.
more, you will have one thought before you just step into the restaurant, for instance. So
True.
which means that experience will really need to count. If somebody is sort of, if they are garnering that courage to enter your restaurant and sit to have that experience, then the experience that you give them will need to match up to it in terms of not only safety, hygiene, but it has to be worth their time to come there.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Towards the end of every episode that I do, I do this segment called Humans of Advertising, right? Where I ask you slightly more broad stroke questions, not necessarily focused on the work, but a little wider in that sense. If you had to, I mean, if you had to tell someone, anybody who you have interacted with professionally, and say that, okay, when you might not know this, but I'm a huge consumer of this, or I'm a huge, let's say, this is something I'm reasonably obsessed with. What would that be that would surprise them?
Wow, that's quite a question.
It can be anything. It can be. I've had people give me the most random answers on this one, so that anything goes.
Yeah, I think I'm a huge consumer of. Okay, I have to think about it. Top of mind.
Top of mind, whatever that comes to your top of my
I think
mind.
I'm a huge consumer of this whole healthy snacking fad. I know almost
Yeah,
everything about each category. I love trying these products, uh,
yeah,
and yeah, I think a lot of people may not know it. So the whole healthy snacking space especially premium healthy snacking space is is very interesting to me.
But that's true, right? I've realized the more you look at it, there's so many things there you didn't even know existed. And like if you keep going
And they
into
may not be
it's
even
like
healthy. So they are interesting.
that is so true. That is so true.
Yeah.
What can you put together in an instant?
A thought, a message, a guidance. I can put it
Perfect.
together very fast.
Anything that you read recently, or let's say listened to on a podcast, or anything like which you would recommend, or even watched in that sense?
I'm actually reading a book on Buddhism. So
Okay.
I follow this Buddhism from called Nichiren Daishonen's Buddhism. So I'm reading a novel from there called New Human Revolution, which has been written by Dr. Daisaku Ikeda, which I feel is really really helps you in going through challenging times like these.
That's nice. And to wind it all up, if I had to ask you, why will advertising not die? What would your response be to that?
Because consumers will always want products, and advertising will always be a medium to bring it to them. We're all materialistic at the end of the day, and how will you know about it if there was no advertising? So advertising is never going to be there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for doing this. I think it's given me at least some very clear points to kind of think about, especially when it comes to how content and experience can kind of drive into this space. Because I didn't look at it from the way that you spoke about it. I think that's something which I think everybody can kind of take notes from. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Varun. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that show. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money. Some really fun guests on the network this week. Cyrus welcomed Dia Mirza to come and have a conversation about all kinds of different things. Danny Morrison was on Edges and Sledges, the cricket podcast. If you haven't heard that, that's always a fun listen. And Rahul Subramanian was on Football Should Fall to grow their ever more exciting list of guests. And it's not just that. Mantra Mugdha, old friend of ours, was on Advertising is Dead. Manu Pillai was on the Filter Coffee podcast. It's been one great guest after the other. And with that, we hope to catch you again next week.
What do we have to do? Welcome to What a Play, you guys. This is the favorite sports podcast of several sports persons such as myself, Dudeja and Mikhail, who also happen to be the hosts.
Yes, you should definitely listen to our podcast for our take and quite a uninformed but hilarious take on sports every week. We give out awards, we discuss what happened in the world of sports, and
we take breaks as well.
We come up with jingles and sound effects on the go. So you should definitely give us an example of a sound effect, Dudeja.
Bolo Matthew Vade.
Yeah, tune in for some of that, bro. You can catch us on the IVM network every Wednesday on the go. On the Wednesday, in the Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday, What a Player. What a Player W, Wednesday W.
Wow. Oh, Wednesday. Wednesday to Wednesday, What a Player, Matthew Vade.
रिश्ते में तो हम तुम्हारे पॉडकास्ट लगते हैं. नाम है फुटबॉल शुड बॉल. Presenting Football Should Ball, a show about three friends discussing our favorite game over a beer. Sometimes 3, maybe even 5. Hi, I'm Shiva, and with me are my two sidekicks, Gaurav Sapre and Karthik Iyer. Sidekick? You mean like Batman's Robin or Van Persie Robin? No, I mean like Alexis Sanchez, but with a little more skill than just playing the piano.
Just shows how the best players at Arsenal are mere bench warmers at United.
Oh, thank you, Iyer. But you're a Fulham supporter, so whenever you say anything to support me, I question my beliefs. Just like how Griezmann would say, एक बार मैंने जो decision ले लिया तो मैं अपने आप की भी नहीं सुनता.
Banter aside, we will talk match reports, transfer rumors, top controversies, fantasy football picks, and so much more. So grab a beer and tune in to Football Should Ball every Wednesday on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts.